I have experienced the paranormal my whole life. Although these experiences have scared me, they have provided me with a greater understanding of the paranormal, and above all, provided me with the knowledge that there is much more to this world and this life than what first meets the eye. I've always had some sort of ability to see events before they happen. I explain it to those close to me as extreme déjà vu. My mother and grandmother also have this gift, however, it's never something I have control over. As it has always been a part of my life, I have never thought much of it. That was until I saw something in a dream that I can't explain, and still haunts me to this day. About 4 years ago, the 18-year-old sister of a good friend of mine, May, was in a terrible car crash. She had just dropped her brother off at school and was leaving the parking lot when a pickup truck smashed into the driver's side of the car. The car May was driving didn't have an airbag, so she suffered all the trauma and force of the collision. She was rushed to hospital and went into a coma. Despite this, physicians and the family were confident she would live and recover. The evening of the crash, I had a dream that terrified me. In the dream, I was at the hospital. I was looking down on my friend's family as they clutched May's bandaged hand. Her body was covered in various bandages and casts, and it was clear she was unconscious. Then, in my mind's eye, I watched as her heart monitor went flat. I watched as May passed away. I had never dreamt anything like this before, and woke up in complete shock. In my drowsy state, I shook it off, and eventually was able to fall back asleep. However, the worst was yet to come. 3 days after I had the frightful dream, May suddenly passed away, despite showing many signs of recovery. When I heard the news, I nearly fainted. So disturbed, I did not mention the dream, and never discussed anything about her passing with anyone. This ate away at me more than simple words can describe. Eventually, I confided in my mother. Her only response was, "Our gift is a blessing and a curse." I still don't know what to make of the dream, and do not understand why I had it. Sometimes I feel guilty for having known what was to happen, and for having not said anything to my friend. Should I have told her? Would it have prepared her for her sister's death? I just do not know. I am a paranormal investigator and medium. The dead do not scare me. I often find them to be much more trustworthy and often more fun than the living. After all, they don't have much to lose, considering they already have. Without a doubt, the living can inflict more harm than any spirit can, but that's a story for another time. I was 22 years old when my mom and I and the paranormal investigative team we were members of took part in a charity event. It was put on by a historical society at a charming turn-of-the-century house. For the event, we set up stations where people could experiment with the investigative equipment. It was a pretty sweet deal, considering we enjoyed working with scientific alongside spiritual methods, and not just one or the other. The visitors to the event really got the best of both worlds. It was night and I was sitting in one of the bedrooms, speaking with people as they came in and out, hoping to experience something paranormal. They were disappointed, as nothing was really happening. That was when I saw her. She was a tall, thin, intense-looking woman. She wore a white dress and her hair was piled high. I had never been to this house before and had no idea who this lady was. She sat on the bed, glaring at me. She was upset that people were coming into her bedroom so late at night. She kept saying that she wanted to get some sleep, but the people wouldn't leave her alone. When I see spirits, I see them in my head, almost like you would see an imaginary friend. Only, they're not imaginary, they are real. I asked the woman what her name was, and she told me it was Ruth. I explained to her that if she went to the 3rd floor, she could get some sleep, since no one was allowed up there. After that, she left the room. Ruth. The name stuck in my head, the way peanut butter sticks to the roof of your mouth. Her face, too, stayed in my mind. I could not shake her. Even though I described myself as a medium, when I first saw spirits, it was a battle for my sanity. Am I really seeing these things, or do I just need to up my meds? Shaken, I asked the other investigators if they had seen her. No one had, just me. Desperate to determine whether or not I had invented the whole thing, I went to the ladies who ran the Historical Society for help. Someone had to know who Ruth was, maybe they would know. I gave them a description and even drew a picture of her, hoping it would help them in their search. They offered to look for her in their records, so I left them to it. I returned to the investigation, trying to push Ruth from my mind. Questions, including why she was haunting the house, kept returning to my mind. Was she attached to the house? Something in the house? It was sometime after midnight when the event wrapped up. We packed up and began putting everything in our cars when the 2 ladies who ran the Historical Society approached me. Their faces were as white as sheets. "We found her," they said, trembling. They handed me an old newspaper clipping they had found. It described an anniversary of the Historical Society, and amongst the photographs was a picture of the men and women who owned the house. Now it was my turn to be as white as a sheet. My jaw dropped, and my stomach flipped as I stared into the face of the woman from the bedroom. In the photograph, she was tall and thin, her hair piled high, and her eyes intense. Her name was Ruth Giberson. I felt a combination of shock and relief. Since that time, I have never doubted myself again. I stick to my gut and draw whatever I see. Because of this, my abilities have grown, and it is much easier to now draw those spirits that I see. Around this time last year, my husband and I moved into our new apartment. The building and the apartment is very old and hasn't had the best tenants in the past. However, it was a great deal and we couldn't afford much else. From the time we first moved in, I felt uneasy about our bedroom. Often when I went to sleep, it felt like something was watching me from the side of the bed. I did my best to ignore it, because I knew I got a little anxious in new places and thought it was my anxiety acting up. A few nights later, as I was trying to sleep, I heard a childlike voice, clear as day, whisper into my ear, "Danya." I screamed and clung to my husband, who immediately sat up. As I told him what had happened, I started crying. He consoled me, telling me it was probably just sleep paralysis, and we went back to sleep. Despite my husband's words of reassurance, the next night I could not sleep. Experiences of the paranormal were not new to me. I had a strong feeling that hearing Danya in my ear had been very real, connected to the paranormal, and had not been caused by sleep paralysis or anxiety. Gripped by insomnia, I decided to Snapchat about the experience I had to my friends. The more I talked about it, the more uneasy I became. The feeling of being watched increased. As I recalled the previous night's occurrence, I started thinking that a child's spirit was trying to make contact with me, and that Danya was in fact the child's name. I had never heard that name before, but it sounded plausible enough. I shared my theory with my friends, and afterwards made a poor attempt at falling asleep. The next morning I received a Snapchat from my best friend. I'll never forget what she told me. She said she had done some research around the area and found an article from 2012. It told of the horrific story of a 2-year-old girl who had suffered a brain hemorrhage and died after being repeatedly punched by her mother's boyfriend. The man had eventually pleaded guilty and was sent to prison for killing her. And now for the scariest part of this. They had lived just a few blocks away from our home, and the poor little girl's name had been Danya. When I saw this article, I nearly dropped my phone in disbelief. My heart started racing and I felt sick. Is it possible that this little girl was trying to make contact? Or even more, did she live in the apartment where my husband and I currently resided? I didn't know what to do. The tragic story broke my heart. If this little girl wanted to make contact, was I in any position to tell her no? My husband and I are both very religious, so we decided to pray about it. We asked God to intervene and make sure that if she's meant to make contact with us, to please allow her to do so, and if not, please make her stop. Slowly, the voices and the feeling of being watched vanished. I sometimes think about Danya and wonder why it is she wanted to make contact, and why she chose me. Was she looking for a friend, or had it been something sinister in disguise? I guess I will never know. Although I am eerily right most of the time, there is still a voice which lingers in my mind, telling me I am a total nutter. In order to do my work as a medium, I have to push it aside. Because of this, it is always a nice confirmation when other mediums see the same person as me. I had been doing investigations with my mom and my group for several years. On one occasion, we were in a tiny old bar in Atlantic County, New Jersey, which dated back to the turn of the century. The first floor operated as a regular bar. The menu looked pretty good from what I could tell. But we weren't there to crack open a cold one with the boys. We were doing a paranormal investigation for a local news site. We made our way past the bar and up the stairs. Already, I had the feeling of dread. The upstairs was tiny and cramped, and full of what I can only describe as total heaviness. I could feel it in my chest. Regardless, I wasn't afraid. The upstairs area, I believed, was once some sort of inn. The owner kept trying to tell us about the history, but none of us wanted to hear it, lest we contaminate our evidence. As investigators, the less we knew about a location, the better. I continued to feel the heaviness. I also felt fear, but it wasn't my own fear. I was feeling someone else's fear. Memories came to me. People fighting in the narrow halls, laughter and other sounds. We were far enough from the bar, which was approaching closing time, that I knew I wasn't hearing patrons. I then saw a woman in her 20s with upswept dark hair and petite features poke her head out the door across from me. This place was alive with activity. We unloaded our equipment and I was given a pad of paper to draw on, since I like to draw whatever it is I see. The news crew was interviewing some of us, asking us if we were ever afraid of what we do. Of course, we weren't. After all, we do this to make sure other people aren't afraid to live or work in a haunted space. Not only that, you can't be afraid in these types of situations because fear keeps you from remaining level-headed, and therefore having the ability to rule out any other possibilities than the paranormal. The investigation was long, and we weren't picking up a lot with the equipment. I was, however, getting a lot of psychic impressions. It was at the end of the night when I had my moment. The owner told us we were in his late uncle's room and that he haunts it. That was not what I picked up. My mom and I were in separate rooms. I was with one of my fellow investigators. I started seeing that lady again, the one who had poked her head around the door earlier. Now she was reclined on the bed, posing as she smoked a cigarette. She was in what I can only describe as 1940s negligee. I didn't say anything until the investigator I was with asked if I saw a woman fitting the description. Overwhelmed at having this confirmation, I said yes and immediately did a quick sketch of her. The lady looked on as I doodled, seeming to appreciate the attention we were giving, considering no one had come to visit her in decades. She showed the both of us her past, revealing that she had worked in the brothel that carried on upstairs under the guise of an inn. The room we stood in was her room. At this point, my mother came in from the room next door. As she walked through the threshold, she asked if someone had suffered a heart attack in this room because she felt a sharp pain in her chest when she walked in. Unsure what this meant, we put the information aside for the moment. Between the other investigator and I, we were able to piece the spirit lady's story together. She had been a prostitute who worked upstairs regularly. She was popular because of her looks. As a result, she earned several admirers. One of them, however, was incredibly, unhealthily jealous. He decided that if he couldn't have her, no one could. One night, in the middle of the act, he stabbed his lover in the chest. Her body was left alone, and her voice silenced. Both the investigator and I began to cry, but as soon as we explained her story to the others, the lady was gone. The heavy feeling that had plagued that room dissipated, leaving the air peaceful and content. I think she moved on after having been trapped by the injustice of her end. She had wanted her story out, and I helped her. That night reminded me why I have this ability. It is about far more than simply helping the living. It also brought peace to the dead. I left my quick drawing of her on the nightstand. If she came back to visit, I thought she might like to look at it. I did take a photo of it, however, to remind me of her and of why it is I do the work I do. Thank you so very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe for more. Don't forget that you can also follow me on social media using the links in the description box. Remember, the more you know, the more there is to fear.